Looks like we're streaming now and being recorded, so that makes us good to go, I think. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so if I may call this special meeting of Charleston City Council to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Del Chapo.
Here.
Councilmember Shealy.
Here.
Councilmember Saccharin.
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Here.
Councilmember Brady.
Present.
Councilmember Gregory. Councilmember Waring. Councilmember Seekings.
Here.
Councilmember Shade. Councilmember Griffin. Councilmember Appel.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Mayor Tecklenburg.
Here, and I see Councilmember Griffin connecting right now, so he is also present. So thank you for joining us. If you'd like to join us, Councilmember Mitchell, please lead us in an invocation.
Okay. Dear Lord and Father of all mankind, forgive our foolish ways. We clothe us in our rightful mind and deeper reverence praise. Father, we come and ask you to come into our midst and let us make decisions that's pleasing in your sight, not our sight, but in your sight. Let us be mindful of what our young people need and everyone who needs in this time of this COVID-19 and with this new strain that's affecting our people in the city of Charleston and elsewhere. Father, we ask you to be with us and let us make the decision that's proper for you. Amen.
Amen. And if you'll join me to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. And based on comments at our last meeting and a request for this one, thank you, Madam Clerk, did include a citizens participation period that we will go ahead and do first. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone respond or want to make any comments?
We have two people who have signed up to speak. Did you want to set a time limit?
Well, and you have some other messages or just the two people?
Yes, sir. We have other comments that we received that we forwarded to council earlier today, and I can summarize those as well.
Okay. Well, since we have the time, let's allow a few minutes each. That would be fine.
All right. The first speaker is Dr. Varadi.
Doctor, welcome.
And if you could press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak this evening. And thank you so much for having this meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm here as a pediatrician and one of the leaders of the State American Academy of Pediatrics chapter.
Welcome.
I am here because, thank you so much. We as pediatricians believe it's very important for children to return to school, and it's very important for them to do so safely. Given the recent increase in the Delta variant over the last 3 to 4 weeks, with nearly 90,000 new cases in children in the United States, and South Carolina being the third highest in percentage of children with coronavirus, comprising 19.1% of all cases compared to a national average of 14.3%. It's very important that we make that return to school safe. On July 18th, the American Academy of Pediatrics put out guidelines for the safe return. And the most important part of this guidance was that all children aged 2 and older, including all staff and faculty in the school, wear masks. CDC agreed with this guideline. The reality is masks work very well, and universal masking is one of the best mitigation strategies we have to protect children, teachers, and our community from the spread of coronavirus. So while vaccines are incredibly important, unfortunately, they're not available to children under the age of 12, and that's the age group that makes up a majority of all of our school children. So the best way to keep our schools open and to keep children in school and to keep our communities safe from coronavirus, because children, given that they're not able to be vaccinated, are also going to be spreaders, is to make sure that we have some sort of a mask mandate for children, especially children under the age of 12, but honestly, all children and staff in school. We can see from some examples in other school districts around the country where school has already started, where they started school with a mask optional policy, or the city had a mask optional policy, and after, as little as 4 to 10 days and hundreds of positive cases, they went and changed to a mask required. And just some examples I'd like to give you are Mooresville, North Carolina, Summerall, Texas, Marion, Arkansas, and Clark County, Indiana. And we see more and more school districts and more cities now instituting a mask mandate once school has started and the cases have increased. So our suggestion is, instead of being reactive and waiting for the cases to peak and increase once school starts, we want to be proactive and prevent all the cases, the quarantines, children losing days of education, parents losing hours and days from the workforce, and of course spreading a very serious disease in our community. So I hope that the council, some decision can be made to make it safer for our children. And again, being proactive is always so much better, safer, and easier than being reactive. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate you being with us this evening.
The next speaker is
Thank you.
Dr. Elizabeth Mack. And if you're on the line, if you could press *6, Dr. Mack.
Hey there. Good evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Dr. Mack. Thank you for being with us.
No problem. So again, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Mack. I'm a board certified pediatrician and a pediatric critical care physician here in Charleston. And I'm also a spokesperson for the American Academy of Pediatrics and currently serving as the vice president of the South Carolina American Academy of Pediatrics chapter. And I've been caring for our children with COVID and with Miss C for the last 1.5 years, and I serve with great privilege. And you trust us with the care of your most precious gifts. And this is, of course, a pandemic of the unequal. COVID is surging, and as you know, the Delta variant is incredibly contagious. And my colleagues and I are terrified that we are about to step into what we have seen around the country and even in this state. Just moments ago, Kershaw County announced 100 children positive, and they've just been in school for a couple of days. Lots of preventable deaths around the country, hospitals beyond capacity. We have the power to stop this. This issue is akin to child passenger safety or really any other public health issue. We have car seat laws to protect our most vulnerable, our future. The science is clear. The CDC, DHEC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the South Carolina American Academy of Pediatrics, and many others agree. The science supports universal masking of students, staff, and teachers in schools, regardless of vaccination status, particularly in a community like ours where rates are soaring. Our children below 12 years of age, as Dr. Varady said, do not have access to vaccines at this time, and they deserve extra protections. Additionally, we don't have herd immunity in our community due to a large percent of folks still being unvaccinated, and so we must act accordingly. Note the science is also clear that students are not adversely affected by masking, not their mental health, not their learning, not their speech. From an economic perspective, please note that masking also significantly affects quarantine requirements in the K-12 setting. And as per the CDC, the close contact definition excludes students who are within 3 to 5 feet of an infected student if both the infected student and the exposed student correctly and consistently wear well-fitting masks the entire time. This means less kids on quarantine, more kids in school, less parents scrambling for childcare, less sick citizens, less kids in the hospital. Children need to be in masks safely in school. CCSD beautifully demonstrated this is possible last year with mask mandates, and we have an opportunity for courageous leadership and opportunity to protect children. I urge you to do all in your power to keep our children safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mack. I appreciate it.
And then we did receive some comments, And these comments were forwarded to council in full earlier today for your review. So I will just summarize them. We had 5 people who commented that they opposed the recommendation to mask children in public schools. 4 people said that Charleston should follow Columbia's lead and reinstate the mask mandate to protect children who aren't able to be vaccinated yet. 1 person would like to offer free walk-in appointments for COVID vaccines at Liberty Doctors Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 3 p.m. at 418 Folly Road. 10 people said to mandate masks and vaccines for all ages 12 and up. 3 people said government officials who use their platform to coerce people into making decisions they are uncomfortable with is immoral. 1 person said his children wore masks to school and still contracted COVID-19 and would not participate in wearing masks this time around. 3 people strongly suggested mask usage in schools is not enough and it should be mandated instead. 1 person demanded the city of Charleston be more forceful in controlling COVID-19. 1 person said to study the science before making a recommendation on masks. And 15 people said to protect children in schools who rely on adults to keep them safe and that masks should be required in schools. And those were all the comments that we received.
Well, thank you. That was a good many comments on short notice, and the variety of them kind of illustrates how all over the landscape folks do feel about this issue. I want to thank council for coming together in a special meeting to discuss this evening. I know we have a regular meeting next week, but frankly, that agenda is full, very full. And I thought that the urgency of COVID numbers going up in our community, dictated that we get together and have a discussion about it. And we have this resolution before you tonight to consider. Before we get there, we have a special guest. He's been with us before, Dr. Michael Sweat from the Medical University of South Carolina, who could give us an update on the numbers as he's been studying all along. I want to thank Dr. Sweat in advance for his commitment to public health and his partnership with the city throughout this pandemic. His training and expertise in public health is beyond question. And we really appreciate, Dr. Sweat, your being with us throughout this pandemic. Dr. Sweat.
Thank you, Mayor Tecklenburg. I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you, council members. I'll try to be brief. Just going to do a quick update on where we are standing with the numbers. I'm going to just share my screen here. So I want to start off with the Delta variant. Our molecular pathology laboratory at MUSC, we're actually really lucky here in Charleston to have this activity going. They do sequencing on positive test results. So we have a real wealth of information about what's been happening with the Delta variant. And this graph here is just a week by week breakdown of the different variants we've seen. And it's really striking. The Alpha variant was the most prominent one that we saw up until really around the first part of July, where it just rapidly took over. This really is reflecting the high transmissibility of the Delta variant. Up on the upper right there, I just have a few numbers. These are the R0 numbers estimated for the different virus versions and the original ancestral virus that we had in the beginning. Each person was estimated to infect about 1.5 or 2 other people. The Alpha variant that came in later, that went up to 3, and the Delta variant is up to 5 or 6. So it's an incredibly transmissible variant that we have on our hands right now. Just some national maps. This outbreak really with Delta started in southern Missouri around Springfield, just blew up, incredibly high rates of infection. There was a geographic spread that was noted moving down into Arkansas and Louisiana. Florida had a concurrent outbreak. There's a real trend towards this sort of coastal effect of high numbers. And this, I think, reflects some of the seasonality that we saw last year too, where the whole entire sort of southeast coast in midsummer had a big outbreak. So I think it's a combination of our hot and humid weather, a lot of people traveling and tourists, getting into restaurants with poor ventilation and minimal mask use. That has really sort of led to this explosion. We're now seeing hospitalization rates climbing. There's some real hot spots, particularly around Jacksonville and up into Missouri, Arkansas. Louisiana's having a lot of concerns as well. These really also correlate highly with vaccination rates shown here. These lighter colored areas are low vaccination rates. Just honing in on South Carolina, we in early July just had an explosion of cases on really every coastal county, Horry County, Charleston County, Beaufort County, up and down the coast. But it's shifted a bit. We're now seeing another epicenter up in the Midlands around Columbia, particularly Kershaw County, Richland, Lexington County, and then also this hotspot up in Myrtle Beach, Horry County, and this spills over into North Carolina as well. So very high rates of infection we're seeing throughout the state, and some of these hotspots in particular. Dorchester County is really leading the pack. It's had the highest rate of new infections over the past few weeks by far in the state, and the Kershaw County is catching up quickly. This is just showing the vaccination rates here in South Carolina by county. We are below the national average, which is close to 50% for fully vaccinated, and we're more around 41%. When you just consider all ages, about 50% of people 18 and above in the state. Just looking at the Charleston Tri-County area, quickly we saw this this early surge last summer, and then over the winter, a really large surge occurred, died down to almost nothing. We were getting just a few cases per 100,000 per day in the first few weeks of July. It was striking how quickly we climbed back up with just incredibly high, the highest rates of growth that we had seen since the inception of the epidemic. And that correlated just perfectly with the Delta variant becoming prominent here in our area. We currently have 62 cases per day per 100,000. We also make estimations for what that looks like for the infection rate among people lacking immunity, either from vaccination or prior infection, and that number is 172 cases per day. This really is a massive outbreak occurring among people who lack immunity, and those numbers are stark, not good. Test positivity went from below 5% just weeks ago to up to about 16, 17%. I will say that currently we are not experiencing major stresses in the hospital. I'll come back to a few hospitalization numbers in a minute, but our ICU is currently able to handle the cases that we're seeing. The reproductive number's been going up and down around above 1, and when it's above 1, that means we have growth occurring. I do want to just touch quickly on sort of looking at what's shifted over time. In terms of immunity, back in May, about 30% of the total population in the Tri-County area was fully vaccinated. That's climbed up to 43% here in August. It's really stalled. We've seen a little bump in the past few weeks. I think people are reacting to the Delta variant's presence and getting out and getting vaccinated, but it's not jumping very quickly. We're at a pretty low rate nationally, and it's not enough to contain this epidemic. Natural immunity, we consider that to be people who've had an infection in the past 7 months, and that's because there is good data showing that immunity from natural infection is pretty strong up to 7 months. We just don't know much about past 7 months based on the available data. So we're actually dropping that number down mostly because as we move through time, a lot of the people who got early infections just aren't qualifying in our estimates. But that puts us at about 64, 65% of people with some sort of immunity we think is viable. So that's telling you that that other 30% or so of people are really where these infections are occurring, and it's a really high rate in that group. The big question is what's going to happen next, and one of the best ways to look at that is to consider other locations that have been through Delta variant surges. One of them is the UK, and it's a particularly good comparison because they have a comparable vaccination rate to the United States, although they do have used different vaccines and different combinations and timing. They're about 59% of people fully vaccinated in the UK, and they just went through a very heavy duty Delta surge. And of course, India, where this originated, and very low vaccination rates. And finally, I would just point to Springfield, Missouri, which is where the epicenter was originally here in the US, and they're also now seeing declines. So the good news is this does seem to follow a similar pattern of prior waves that we have had, which is about a 2 to 3 month duration before the rates come down. Prior to vaccination, it's pretty clear that those changes occurred due to people taking behavioral prevention of masking and avoiding crowded indoor spaces and the other prevention techniques that we know. And we're really bad as a society at implementing those as the cases go up. And when they get high, people get concerned and cut back down their interacting and lack of mask use, and the numbers come down. So we're seeing the same pattern, and that's good news for us. The other thing is that many of these curves that we are seeing with Delta are very steep. They tend to climb incredibly fast and also seem to drop off relatively quickly. And it's likely due to the high transmissibility. It just gets in and infects people rapidly in the vulnerable population to the point that it saturates available people to do that. And that combined with people taking precautions brings those numbers down. So I do want to say that in the UK, they've been studying, they've really excellent surveillance programs there, and they do, some of this is with mathematical modeling using those data. They've made recent estimates of the percentage of adults that have COVID-19 antibodies, which is very similar to the numbers I was showing you before for the Charleston area. And these numbers are really quite striking, upwards of 92, 93% of people now after this COVID wave having antibodies either from vaccination or natural infection from being infected. So there's people conjecturing now whether they're going to perhaps get closer to herd immunity just because of these large numbers of people, and we'll have to wait and see. There's still some questions about the veracity of those data, but I think it's a very compelling issue. It's a sad way to go, I want to say, because people could get immunity without going through the very unpleasant experience of having COVID, without spreading it to other people, and without the hospitalization and the pressures that brings on our health system and the mortality that we've seen. We're over 610,000 people have died from COVID in the United States. So we could avoid that with vaccinations. And it is a shame that a lot of people are resisting it. I do want to also just touch on hospitalization impacts. There's another phenomenon that's been picked up, which is, this is just, I tried to line these up, but this is the epidemic curve of new infections that was occurring in the UK and their winter surge. But when this Delta variant surge occurred recently, the rate of hospitalization was much lower. And it's likely because they, as we did here in our country, prioritized vaccinations for older people, and the uptake was quite high. We have very high vaccination rates in the 80% range in the US for people over the age 65, and they're the people who are most likely to be hospitalized. The highest rates of infection now in our area really are among younger people. It's really shifted to a younger population. The modal age is somewhere between 40 and 60. I believe most infections are occurring, that's for hospitalizations, most infections are occurring among younger people than that, but they're not as likely to be hospitalized. And those people who were not quite old enough to feel incentivized to get vaccinated in the 40 to 60 range are really surging in our system. The older people that we're seeing, I would add, we are seeing some people coming in who are older, and many of those people have been vaccinated. So there are breakthrough infections occurring. We do see that more commonly among an older population. They don't always mount as strong of an immune response, but I'm getting reports from our clinicians that many of those patients are actually doing pretty well and being discharged. So we are seeing some impact among older vaccinated people as well. And then just finally, looking ahead, this is the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation model. It's a good model. They tend to predict quite well in the short term. I think they're not as good at predicting long-term trends, but here we are today, and this is the base estimate here for what they predict our case rate would be. They do note that if people sort of, as has happened before, loosen up on their sort of preventative behaviors and engage in greater mobility, we could have a higher rate. And then they make a run of analyses looking at if we had, almost universal mask use. And it is quite striking how impactful mask use could be if people at a very high rate utilize masks, and particularly use them properly and use high quality masks. There's a lot of poor mask hygiene out there, but it could really have a significant impact. I just would say that it's looking very much like what we saw in the winter in terms of the numbers, and the hospitalization rates mirror that as well. Finally here, this is just the most recent data I pulled on the number of patients we're seeing in the MUSC system across the state. We've definitely seen an increase. It's manageable at this point. As I pointed out earlier, ICU bed utilization is really fine right now. And then this just came out from the South Carolina Hospital Association comparing the hospitalization rate in our last surge in the winter, which was around 30% of diagnosed patients. And we're currently seeing about 14% of people hospitalized. So that is somewhat perhaps reflecting what we saw in the UK data. Again, it's probably because older people are getting higher rates of vaccination. We're not quite at the peak. So we'll see where this goes, but that is a reassuring sign. So just to wrap up, over 90% of our new cases are now from this Delta variant. Really rapid onset of that occurred. It's incredibly transmissible. It correlated almost perfectly with our rapid increase in diagnosed cases. Mathematical models suggest a similar impact may occur to our winter surge. It would be estimated to occur sometime in September in the coming months. There is a lot of uncertainty with this. Things have changed. Delta is a little less predictable. Vaccination rates coupled with age make this a little bit challenging to make predictions, but I think we're likely to see a sort of peak in September with a drop-off occurring. Population level immunity is really suboptimal right now to keep this epidemic under control. We got to get those immunity numbers up. The vaccination rates are too low, with a lot of pockets of areas, even in highly vaccinated places, pockets in geographic areas and populations that remain unvaccinated. We need more data on the durability of immunity, both from vaccination and natural infection. We are seeing a higher rate of breakthrough infections with Delta, although it's not been substantial thus far. But all eyes are on that, because if that's the case, we're going to need to consider booster shots and tweaking the vaccines. And then, expect increases to occur quickly, and I think also probably decline steeply due to the high transmissibility and the saturation effects we're going to see. Perhaps we're going to get closer to herd immunity, unfortunately, through this surge and maybe upcoming surges. And then the proportion of cases hospitalized right now may be lower than in the past, which is a blessing. And that's really a testament to the efficacy of vaccines at keeping people out of the hospital. But just in addition, it is stressing hospital systems around the country. So we are on our highest alert to see what's going to happen and do everything we can to, support prevention. So that terminates my presentation, and I'm certainly happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sweat. Does anybody have a question for Dr. Sweat? I don't see any. So thank you again. I thanked you in advance. I thank you in arrears. So you've been a partner throughout all of this with us, and the most current and expert information. So thank you, Dr. Sweat. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Jason had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jason. Councilmember Saccharin.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I put it up a little late. I just want to say thanks for the presentation. I guess the one question I have with everything that we know as we head into the school year, I mean, that's the reason for this particular meeting. Based on your professional experience in forecasting, would you expect that COVID numbers are going to increase as students go back to school?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. It's a bit of a complicated answer. Yes, I do. If mask use is not in place, I do think we would see, it's just a fact that they protect people, and COVID is out there and Delta is very transmissible. I'll tell you this, in Israel, when they have very high vaccination rates there, and not, the same as here, not among children, and they went back into a lot of restrictions, and it was driven by large outbreaks that occurred in unmasked kids in schools. There's also some very strong data coming out of North Carolina looking at mask use and its efficacy. And I think what we've learned over the past year, and has been looked at extensively, is schools really can manage this. And it's really important for kids to be in school. There's a lot of damage to kids to not being in school. And trying to, study and learn at home. They miss out on a lot of social interaction, and it's hard for them to maintain attention. There's just many studies showing this, but it's also been shown that if, protocols are followed, and schools are a very institutionalized setting, so it's easier to implement those. They actually have managed it quite well with low rates of transmission, but that was under the scenarios where there was consistent mask use universally in school settings. So, how high that will go, we don't know. Again, Delta's, it's a new animal. It's a lot of unpredictability. We were hearing from some pediatricians about what they're seeing day to day. And we are seeing a fair number of teens and some pediatric cases. MIS-C is a real concern and been growing. So, all things said and done, I think I would personally, based on my experience and what I've studied and read, and think that mask use is a good strategy to go forward with.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? So thank you, Dr. Sweat. And thank you again, council members, for coming together to hear this latest update and consider resolution this evening. It's already been well described how the Delta virus variant is at least twice as contagious as what we've seen before. It's kind of like wildfire. We've seen all the numbers of cases, of hospitalizations, and even of deaths go up in the last month in South Carolina. I don't think this is an exaggeration. This is real, and it's clear from the CDC, from the DHEC, from our healthcare partners and professionals that vaccination is a first line of defense, but that masking would be the second line of defense. We have for your consideration a resolution tonight to urge all our citizens, children over 2, to wear masks in school starting next week when they attend school, to urge all citizens, vaccinated or unvaccinated, when they're inside an enclosed building, an enclosed area, and around other folks, that they wear masks. We're encouraging everyone who's not vaccinated to please get vaccinated. We're encouraging the FDA to please make the final determination on the vaccine so that children under 12 will be able to take the vaccine. So these are the things in the resolution. I know a number of our citizens' comments and some of our medical healthcare professionals would prefer us to have a mandate rather than a recommendation. This is an urgent recommendation. I must share with you that I and we as a city staff have considered a mandate. Enforcement, y'all, is a real issue given the box we've been put in by the legislature with the budget proviso that they passed, that you've all been reading about how the city of Columbia and the attorney general are kind of clashing with each other. And that extends, by the way, all the way down to our school resource officers who are partially funded by state funds. So once again, when you really consider the practical matter of enforcement, a mandate is a very difficult thing to do, if not impossible. And we saw Monday evening we were waiting to see what the school district themselves would do. And even though the administration of Charleston County School District would recommend mask wearing, they're not in a position where they can require it. So I would prefer as mayor and we as a city to not end up in a argument about mandate versus requirement and lose the impact that we might have to convince one more citizen to go out and get vaccinated, to convince one more parent to consider this information and the healthcare ramifications and ask their child to mask up when they go to school next week. And so the thought behind this resolution is for us all to be on one page, on one message to our community about public health and not about politics, and to ask folks to do what our healthcare professionals are recommending, and that's to go out and get a vaccine if you hadn't gotten one yet. And regardless, for right now, while this Delta virus is so contagious, to wear a mask indoors. That's what CDC, DHEC, everyone is recommending. And so by way of explanation, I wanted to share that with you and would gladly entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
I move that we approve the resolution.
Thank you, council member. Do we have a second? Just for
I'll second.
I second.
Councilmember Jackson. Discussion, Councilmember Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that this is a good compromise. You know, there are definitely people in our community that are going to send their kids to school without wearing a mask. I mean, it's going to happen. Our governor, our state legislature, they made decisions that we have to abide by. But for all of the people out there that think that this is a mandate, it is not. It is a city asking politely for people to go get vaccinated and to wear a mask indoors. That's all we're doing is asking you, to think about your neighbors. And I think that's a very fair thing to do. I think that we would have some trouble if we tried to mandate. I think that like you said, we've seen in Columbia that is a contentious issue that I don't think we should be getting involved in. And we certainly don't want to put our school districts, Charleston and Berkeley County, at risk of losing public funding because of decision that we have made. So I think that this is a very, very courteous and good compromise. The people that don't want to wear a mask or the people that want to send their kids to school without, they still are able to do that. But, like you said, if we can convince one more person that that's the right thing for them to do, I think that's a good compromise. I understand that some people probably will never get vaccinated. And I'm certainly never going to be supportive of us forcing people to get vaccinated. I just don't think that government intervention is a smart thing to do. But in this instance, I think it's a good compromise for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mitchell.
Mayor and Councilman, my colleagues, I think people need to start taking this thing very seriously. My daughter who works for Roper, she was tested positive. My grand was tested positive today. He's only 2 years old. And he was tested positive for the COVID today. So he's 2 years old. So you better take it very seriously. People don't understand what's going on, but this is a very serious matter. When she called me today, the thing kind of blew my mind because he's only 2 years old and don't know what can happen from this point on. So people got to take this very seriously. People say they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that, but they better take it very seriously. That virus is coming and people are dying from it. It's not a fake thing. You can see it happening every day. I had too many friends that died from the various COVID-19 itself, and they didn't have any underlying condition, but it just happened. So I'm saying that we need to take this very seriously. He's only 2 years old. 2 years old, my grandson. So I said, people wake up. And my daughter, she works in Roper, and she's tested COVID. She wasn't now for about 10 days. But the thing is that we still have another young child she's only 4 months old. But they said the daycare that they found that was shut down twice. The daycare was shut down twice because people in that daycare has COVID. Even the cook have COVID, the teachers have COVID, so they don't know where they got it from, attracted it from. So you just don't know. That's all I want to say on that matter.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Saccharin and then Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that I appreciate your leadership throughout the process over the past 18 months, and I'm proud that the decisions we've made have kept the city safe, much to the chagrin of many in the community. I think we've done a great job. For those on council, I would just say, sit back for a few minutes, because this might be a lengthy comment, but I've been thinking about this for the past 18 months, and I would be remiss if I didn't share my thoughts as a parent of 2 children in our public schools, someone that's worked in public education here in Charleston for 10 years. I would be remiss if I didn't share my thoughts, and it pains me that we find ourselves at this point. Let me begin by saying I acknowledge that the difficult position our local school board and superintendents are in right now. As the governor and the attorney general threaten them with lawsuits and reductions of funding if they don't adhere to the governor's mandates. That's crazy. So if it was up to the school board and our school districts, they would be taking action. And let me also say, I respect the individuals who don't want to get vaccinated. And this might argue or this might anger some of the folks that are for masks. I'm trying to understand. I really am. I'm trying to understand those individuals that don't want to get vaccinated or believe their child has the right not to wear a mask. We all know that wearing a mask is uncomfortable. It fogs up my glasses and it's difficult to breathe. And when I got the vaccine, I thought I would be able to toss that mask out, and I did. To those that are opposed our former mask mandates and now oppose any discussion about mandating children under 12 to wear a mask, I just want to state that I respect your opinion. I really do. And I'm coming from a place of shared mutual respect. I'm not trying to be condescending. The issue, like so many others in our country, has divided us, and it doesn't have to be divisive. In my heart, I really do believe if we all agreed that keeping our kids safe and healthy is our top priority, and we started with that shared vision, the debate about masks or not wearing masks would seem trivial. Let's start with that shared vision to keep our kids safe. When it comes to our children, especially because those that aren't vaccinated, we should always err on the side of caution. That is the creed of working in public education with our students. Err on the side of caution. I'll also acknowledge that there are instances where mask wearing amongst our children is not practical, and we have to work with those parents on a case-by-case basis. But it has to be documented by medical professionals. And I just want to acknowledge that there are cases when children cannot wear masks. I want to acknowledge that. Having said that, a vast majority of students, including my own daughter, wore a mask all last year, and she suffered no ill effects other than the messaging she heard on the local news and the adults in her life making an issue when there was none. That's a fact. She wore it, she accepted it. She didn't want to wear it like her dad, but she did it because she did it for her classmates. Let me just say, while I respect the opinion and understand the concerns regarding vaccinations and mask wearing, this doesn't negate the fact that wearing a mask reduces transmissions. That's a fact. We have a year of data that demonstrates the efficacy of mask wearing. I also want to acknowledge that me spouting off these facts or data is not going to change anyone's hearts and minds. Sadly, this has become a cultural and political issue where our emotional connection to the fight sadly overshadows our ability to think holistically and use data to inform our decision-making. Many argue that being forced to wear a mask violates their constitutional right to liberty. And I say this, I think it's a mistake to think of liberty as an absolute self-indulgence without restraint. We don't have the liberty to set our house on fire, do we? The reason we don't is because we have neighbors. This is the same principle, yet some, they just don't see it that way. To all those claiming the mask mandate runs counter to our founding fathers and the Constitution, I say this, look back in history. There are several examples where our founding fathers restricted certain freedoms when they fought to contain diseases like smallpox and yellow fever in the late 1700s. This is all documented. As someone who works in education and speaks directly to teachers, students, and parents every day, I can honestly tell you that a majority of teachers welcome the mask mandate and an overwhelming majority of parents and students support it. As a reminder, the state of South Carolina currently requires all parents to have their children vaccinated for polio, hepatitis, whooping cough, chickenpox, and measles. These vaccines are required for school attendance now. It's widely accepted that the point of these requirements is to protect all students. Why is a mask mandate any different? Mandatory immunization of school children clearly intrudes on or burdens parental autonomy. I get that. Yet both the protection of children from infectious diseases and the ensuring herd immunity allows that to make sense. We do it because it protects all of our kids. This is how we beat polio and whooping cough, and this is how we can beat COVID. There is no difference. I'm almost done, council members. But it's been 18 months, and I feel like this is important. I'm going to freely admit that we don't know exactly how the Delta variant will affect our kids, but data from school districts that just opened up suggests we are seeing increases in hospitalizations amongst our children in places like Texas. ICUs are full. I'm not trying to raise the red flag. Based on what we heard today, I think we could see over the next 2 months an increase, and then it might slightly drop off. But we are going back to a situation where our kids are going to be in school buildings, in close quarters with other kids. Schools can do a good job of maintaining proper protocols, and we did that last year. Social distancing and masks created a situation where we didn't have to close schools. And this is where I'm going to get to my last point. If we have to close schools, this means students are going to be home again, which will disrupt parents' work schedules, which will disrupt our local employers' ability to get back to normal operations. So when I hear all the talk about how we support small businesses in the local economy, I'm going to tell you, the best thing to do is get vaccinated and institute a mask mandate for our children so we don't close schools. If we close schools, parents are forced to stay home. And lastly, let me just add one more thing about school closures and remote learning and speak to this through our equity lens. When schools close, the students who are well-resourced, like my kids, are going to be fine. The parents will hire a tutor, pool their resources with other families, and hire a teacher. Many of these families have reliable internet access and several digital learning devices at the house. When the nature of your job allows you to work from home and supervise your child's learning, the impact on the family is far less disruptive. Those that work in our restaurants, hotels, and grocery stores, they don't have that option. Neither do our police officers, firefighters, nurses, doctors, teachers. When duty calls, they respond selflessly. The data is clear that learning loss in Charleston County last year was extensive. And unfortunately, most of that learning loss occurred in communities of color. If you're a 10-year-old child whose family doesn't have a consistent access to internet, and both your parents cannot afford to simply stay home and supervise you, it's pretty clear to see why school closures have a disproportionately negative effect on our Black and brown students. We should be doing everything we can to ensure all students are learning in.
Uh-oh, you froze up on us, council member.
What was that?
You froze up on us at that last comment.
I'm simply saying that we need to do everything we can using evidence-based approaches to do what we did last year, which was keep schools open, keeps kids in the classroom learning, not remotely. I think we have a responsibility as a city to step up. Our local community deserves leadership on this issue. And before it's too late, we're going to find ourselves playing catch up. This is my last point. What kind of lesson are we passing on to our kids when we actively promote our individual immediate wants over the good of the community and common purpose? Mayor and council, I thank you for giving me this time to express my position on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, council member. Council member Jackson.
I mean, I'm so glad to go behind my colleague, Councilmember Saccharin. So I will primarily just strongly associate and gratefully support his word. I only feel personally one, small but very important to our family part of the personal experience that Councilmember Mitchell and Councilmember Saccharin have just expressed to us and to our public who are watching. My family has two public educators, our two daughters. one at the College of Charleston, the other one at a high school in West Ashley. And our grandson, who's going to be going into the preschool this year, is susceptible to everything that we've all just, been educated about by Dr. Sweat and heard about anecdotally from those of us who, have children in our families' lives. Mayor, I know you have the same situation. So I honestly, I don't understand the thinking that is ignoring the personal safety of this. It really is just foreign territory to me. I think Councilmember Saccharin said it well, that when are we gonna, be the models for our children to understand that they are being trained up as citizens of our great country to sacrifice some of their own personal liberty in order to achieve the common goals that are the right thing for our community at the right time. And this is one of them. I really didn't even think about, how we just, made our doctor's appointments when my kids were little and went off and got their shots updated, or dug in our files and made sure that we could prove that they were up to date with their vaccines. I mean, it makes no sense that people should be resisting to have to do that. And in the case of the younger children now, the only way we can protect them is to wear masks. So the one thing that I wrote down, Dr. Sweat gave us a really good holistic and thorough presentation of all the latest data and statistics and the analysis about all of that. But the one thing that I wrote down as he was speaking and looking at the UK and India and Missouri, I think it was, is that he said, the high numbers of a spike require people, or basically compel people who are experiencing that spike to take reactive precautions. And then that ultimately brings the spike down. So we in Charleston, and under your leadership, Mayor, and under the willing votes of our council, we were reacting to news that we were getting from the West Coast a year ago in early March. And then we saw the numbers coming to Charleston. So we reacted quickly to what we saw and we're able to bring our numbers down way ahead of other localities in our own state, and certainly up and down the country where people were not reacting so quickly. So I know I'm gonna vote for the resolution tonight because I know that's the only legal avenue that we have before us on the agenda. But I thought we were also going to talk about adding an agenda item on Tuesday night, which we have our own operating rules to be able to do, that would then take up a requirement, mask ordinance. Yes, the school system is in a box right now, and so are we. We can't refund our school resource officers in time to pay them outside of state funding. Maybe if we need to take that step, we can figure that out in the short term. But for right now, I think we could take up an ordinance on Tuesday night that would at least require masks back in the city, in public, in inside places that we have control over by our laws. That would protect kids in preschool and daycare. That would protect kids that are coming back to the College of Charleston and going out and about and wanting to be together as they start their school year. I would be happy to vote for such a requirement. And I think seeing the comments, yes, they were nuanced, but in my count, as I went through them this afternoon, basically we had 44 written comments and 33 of them were asking us to take action to require masks in our city, whatever the differential of how they were approaching that. 33 and 11 people said no. So I think that's pretty good percentage, 75% representative in that quickly organized set of comments. As you said, Mayor, the word just went out at the end of the day yesterday, and comments were due this afternoon. So in less than 24 hours, we've had very strong comments from a representative body of people. And I think we should take that seriously and take up an ordinance on Tuesday night. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Brady and then Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to give credit where credit's due and thank you and actually Governor McMaster for encouraging vaccine use among all those that are eligible. But I want to point out, and I've been hot under the collar about this today, and normally when we find ourselves having to wade into these issues, I write out a prepared statement, but I've just been so hot under the collar that I wanted to speak a little off the cuff. I have some notes here, but I want to note that we find ourselves here because of our state legislature. And people may be asking how that comes to be. Well, there's an election next year, and there is a base in a partisan election that has to be placated based on circumstances that they find themselves in as well. They're forcing distasteful decisions down to municipalities in an effort to force municipalities to vote on these distasteful decisions in order to ward off challengers going forward. They love home rule when they can ward off the federal government, yet conveniently ignore it when it is convenient for them, meaning that they hamstring local school boards and municipalities. And I think most people would agree that the government that governs best is the one that is closest to you. And I think we all inherently know that. And I just want to point out that Attorney General Wilson joined a lawsuit for Texas challenging other states' electors in this past election. The US Constitution, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I did take civics, is crystal clear that states get to choose the time, manner, and qualifications of electors. That is a state's decision. Yet our Attorney General joined another state to challenge another state's electors. If you took a look at the budget proviso, it was so hastily written and so badly worded, it just defies logic. And his opinion indicated that because the proviso specifically said it was for schools. It did not mention municipalities. And his opinion referenced that the intent of the legislature, that's not his to determine. That is a court's to determine. So my suggestion, I agree with Councilmember Griffin. I like the recommendation. I think there's going to be market solutions that are going to come out where insurance companies are going to begin raising premiums on people who aren't vaccinated, and employers are going to begin requiring vaccinations for their employees. And there's going to be a market correction that's going to lead to increased vaccinations. I'm wearing my 9/11 pin today because it's 30 days until 9/11's 20th anniversary. And I hope that we will all remember that at our September meeting. But I also hope that for the brave New York City firefighters and New York City police officers and everyone that fought in the war on terror to keep us safe, that those sacrifices weren't in vain. And we will mask up. I was at Target today. Over 70% of the people, I was keeping count as I was going down the aisles, including myself, were masked. I think that people understand it, and I don't think we necessarily have to have a mandate. But the recommendation is a great step forward. And I thank my colleagues and hope we can move forward together.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first want to give a thanks to Dr. Verratti, Dr. Mack, Dr. Sweet, and all the other medical professionals that I've had the opportunity to speak with over the past week. Look, here's where I come down on this. I don't think politicians, state or local, ought to be making public health decisions during a complex, evolving global pandemic. Those decisions should be made by public health experts and school administrators with input from parents. Unfortunately, a handful of state legislators in the upstate, who are frankly known for their extreme ideological views, believe they know what's best for Charleston and have decided to play politics with the health and safety of children. Their now infamous budget proviso was inserted and adopted before the Delta variant hit the scene. Just think about that for a moment. These so-called small government, pro-life politicians believe they know better than the CDC, DHEC, the Department of Education, pediatricians, and local school boards and administrators. In my view, this is an outrageous assault on home rule, medical science, democracy, common sense, and common decency. I think we should follow the City of Columbia's lead and adopt an enforceable mask ordinance for kids 12 and under. I've looked into the legal issues, and in my view, this issue is not nearly as black and white as Attorney General Wilson suggests. I have respect for Attorney General Wilson, but he is a Republican politician. He's not a judge, and his opinion is just that. It's an opinion. Carl, you stole a little bit of my thunder, but I was going to say this is the same Attorney General who signed on to a lawsuit brought by the state of Texas to throw out the results of the 2020 presidential election. I say this just to keep his opinion in perspective. A neutral legal opinion that can only come from a court. That's the only body that can conclusively decide the law on this issue. But I think this is a legal fight worth having. We're talking about the health and safety of kids, for crying out loud. I support a mask mandate and joining this fight. It's worth it. Let's do it. I'm ready to do it tonight. We can amend the ordinance by a 2/3 vote. I'm not sure we've got those votes. I'd like to see perhaps if we do, but if we don't have it tonight, I certainly support us putting something on the agenda for Tuesday to make this mandate enforceable. You've got municipalities all over Texas doing this. You've got municipalities all over the country doing this. They're defying these political grandstanding moves by governors and state legislators who have no business getting involved in this issue. I think the city of Charleston should join that fight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Gregory.
Thanks for that, Ross. I agree with you totally. I think this is one of those situations that I would call good trouble. I think it's something that we need to take on as the largest city. And Mayor, I mean, this is not the first time that we would be taking on something that's unpopular. We've led this fight before. And I do think that we should move forward with a mask mandate in all public buildings, and that includes schools. I have no problem supporting that. I think when we start making decisions with regard to the lives of our children and the benefits of our children, I really think that, you know, we're really off course, Mayor. And I think that this issue is serious enough for the city of Charleston to take a leadership role to say that our children come first. I think it's time for us to join the fight in the battle. Let's get in some good trouble, folks. I think it's time for us to let folks know that the city of Charleston, okay, is going to put our children first, regardless of what the consequences may be, legal or otherwise. I think we need to send that message, okay, as the largest city and as a city that's the leader of this state. I think so many others will follow our lead if we move forward with a mask mandate for all public buildings, including schools. And let's see what happens. That's just good trouble, folks. Let's get in some good trouble. I'm ready. Thanks, Mayor.
Anyone else before I go back to Councilmember Griffin? Councilmember Griffin?
Yes, sir. I have a question for Mr. Johnson.
Yes, sir.
Based on the governor's executive order banning local municipalities from enforcing a mask mandate, and based off of the budget that was passed by our state legislature, what grounds would our city have to stand on to vote on a mask mandate or making people wear a mask?
Well, first, might I ask whether or not this is a subject we might want to take up in an executive session?
No, sir.
For the purpose of legal
I
advice?
don't see why. I don't see why it would need. It's public information. I'm asking just for your legal opinion on whether or not you think that we would be going against what has already been presented on the state level.
If the question then is whether or not the city of Charleston could pass a mandate for the wearing of masks in public schools, and whether or not that would violate the budget proviso that has been referred to earlier in this conversation, yeah, the budget proviso purports to preclude any mandate for the wearing of masks in public schools where state funds are used to enforce the mandate.
I've just got, you answered my question. Thank you so much. One follow-up question. Back in May, the governor had an executive order that said that no local municipalities could use a state of emergency or could create a mask mandate. If a city has an ordinance of that sort, are we required to follow an executive order coming down from the governor?
My belief is that the city has authority and had the authority at the time to pass the ordinance that it passed that required the use or the wearing of masks in the city buildings and so forth. If I understand your question correctly.
Well, back in May, as soon as the governor put out his executive order banning local municipalities from having a mask ordinance, we then retracted ours immediately. So,
yes.
And that executive order is still in effect. So I'm confused as to why our city council feels we can then now put one back. Councilmember Pell, you have something to say? You're distracting me.
I was just saying the governor's executive order is expired. It's no longer in effect.
Council,
When did that expire?
I'm not sure. Mr. Johnson, do you have any follow-up? The point that I've heard before, Councilmember Griffin, is that his executive order said that we couldn't base a mask ordinance on his emergency, his state of emergency. But correct me if I'm wrong, Councilor. We do have the authority, if we so chose, to enact a mask mandate in our city. And by the way, on an administrative note, we have gone back to phase 3 of our own protocol for COVID-19, which includes a requirement for masking in our own city buildings and facilities. That went into effect this past Monday. But I do believe we have the authority to enact a mask ordinance generally, although you might have to exclude school buildings because of the budget proviso. That's the way I understand it. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree with that interpretation. And I think the governor's emergency order expired earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken. I can't recall precisely when, but I agree.
It wasn't an emergency order. It was an executive order.
An executive order. I can't recall precisely when it expired, but it did expire or has expired. But I do believe that the city generally has the authority to enact the mask mandate that the mayor just alluded to.
Okay, well, I appreciate your opinion on that. And my follow-up is just that I have a hard time believing that our council would be willing to put our school district's funding, the mechanism that allows our kids to go to school, at risk by defying that. I don't think that's good trouble. We're actually doing the exact opposite of what we're saying we're trying to do, which is send kids to school by completely defying that legislature's budget, and by trying to say that we're going to make people wear the mask. We are actually putting our kids at risk of having teachers in the classrooms and getting that funding. So to me, that's ridiculous that we would even consider that. But if that's the path that we're going, I'm on a completely different wavelength than y'all. I thought we were in here to come up with a good compromise, but I can see that's not really the case. So I'm really going to have to reconsider where I'm going to vote on this.
So could I suggest we move ahead with the call the question on the resolution? It's clear at our next council meeting that this discussion can continue. In the meantime, we're going to watch the numbers carefully and see what happens every day and keep our options open. But I do want to repeat one thing I said before, and I did not want our discussions to devolve into the politics of all this and keep us all on one page about preaching the message amongst your constituents, however you can, that the real fundamental important thing is for our citizens to get vaccinated and wear masks, despite of the rules and regulations about all this. So unless there's a further compelling comment, I'd like to call the question. All in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Yeah. Thank you. The ayes have it. So our next meeting, as you all well know, will be next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. At this point, we're still planning on meeting in person with masks at the Daniel Island Recreation Center. Anything else to come before us this evening, Councilmember Brady?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had just wanted to say, as it occurred to me as we were talking about this, that if Attorney General Wilson did challenge the City of Columbia in court, I want to ask Mr. Johnson, would there be anything to prevent us from filing an amicus brief in support of the City of Columbia?
I would not be aware of any impediment to the city filing an amicus brief in support, assuming the Supreme Court takes up this issue. I see no reason why the city could not file an amicus or seek to file an amicus brief.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other final comments, questions? If not, we'll see you next Tuesday, if not sooner. Thank you again, council members, for coming together for this important update and this discussion. We needed to have this discussion.